Hello, I'm Michael Voris.
And I'm Father Pablo, Catholic missionary priest. We really want you to watch every week the one true faith. Had you left that one true faith, please come home. We're waiting for you because we love you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to The One True Faith. We call this show the most disturbing hour on television because we talk about where we're going to spend eternity, and that if you're not doing a good job of living your life in a holy fashion, that should be very disturbing. As a matter of fact, if you're doing what you consider to be a good job and trying, it still should be disturbing because, Jesus commands us to be perfect, and we have to do our absolute best to fulfill God's will in everything, even when it is extremely difficult. And that's a nice segue into today's topic, because we're going to talk about the Catholic Church's teaching on sexual morality. And, for about the last 40 years or so, there has been a great deal of misunderstanding in the Church regarding a lot of the teachings, but probably around no other topics as much as around this topic, particularly the 6th and 9th commandments. There was a time way back in church history where this sort of thing would never have come up as something to challenge. Sexual morality would never have come up as a topic to challenge. They were arguing about the real presence. They were arguing the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. They were arguing about the divinity of Christ, the humanity of Christ, free will, grace, predestination, all of these big, huge topics. The thought of sitting around talking and having a near revolt over sexual morality that's really something that's sort of new to our century on this sort of wide scale. And in many ways, the Church's history can sort of be traced by the history of the revolts against the teaching. There are persecutions, there are heresies, there are schisms. All of these different things happen at different times in the Church's history. But the big one today is really the refusal to accept the Church's authority, the authoritative teaching of the Church. That's the big one today. Now, in many ways, that's always sort of been the one, but specifically with regard to the 6th and 9th commandments. 6th and 9th commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery and do not covet thy neighbor's wife. Sexual morality issues are so misunderstood, what the Church actually teaches about them, and disregarded in today's world wholesale by Catholics, by non-Catholics, by virtually everybody, that it is truly, truly disturbing. And this one sort of hits us right where we all live, because we all have a sexuality. We all know about sex. We've all been exposed to it in one form or another. Many of us are married, have experienced it. Many of us, sadly, myself included, guilty, who've not been married, have experienced it. Some to a sickening, disgusting degree, and that would be me. So when I'm sitting up here talking about sexual morality in the Church's teaching, I know what I'm talking about from experience. Not necessarily from the Church's teaching on it, but from my own experience. I led an incredibly sinful life before I started doing this, this being the show here. And I know the depravities to which people can sink when they don't follow the Church's teaching about sexual morality. And, St. Augustine and I have a lot in common. The saint part would not be it. But St. Augustine and I have an awful lot in common. We each had a mother that was very, very, very concerned and prayed for years for us to see the light. And at least he did. I hope I have. He made it. I'm praying, so please pray for me, because, struggles with sexuality, as we all know, are extremely difficult. They hit us right where we live. And there's a reason that Satan goes after that one, because it's something common to all of us. But we'll get into that in a little bit. The big confusion with the Church, in the Church, about its teaching about sexual morality really started in the mid to late 60s. There was word after Vatican II, which is Second Vatican Council, which was in the early 60s, that after that concluded that the church was going to take a look at the topic of artificial contraception or birth control for Catholic married couples. And this debate sort of went on behind the scenes for a couple of years, and they were doing research and this and that. Well, in the meantime, the secular press had sort of somehow gotten the impression that the church was going to change its teaching on artificial birth control. And in 1968, about 2 years after all of that research had begun, Pope Paul VI issued a papal letter. For those of you who aren't Catholic, it's an instruction letter, it's teaching, but the name of it is called an encyclical, big fancy word for teaching, a letter. And in that letter, in that encyclical, he said that he reaffirmed the church's ban on artificial contraception. Well, that threw the world into a tizzy. People were like, there were posters. I remember seeing these. There were posters of like Pope Paul there, where they'd superimposed a wagging finger saying, "You can't use the pill," and shaking his finger at you. This became a laughing stock teaching. And unfortunately, among many Catholic clergy and hierarchy, they immediately started publishing letters and putting notices in diocesan publications and going on with press conferences saying, Catholics do not have to believe this. Catholics are free to follow their conscience. They were so wrong. They are so wrong. You are not allowed to do whatever you want to do just because it's hard to do. You are not allowed to do that. They were wrong. There was one guy who was a father, Charles Curran, who was a teacher at Catholic University, and came out and said, the Pope's all wrong, people don't have to listen to this, you make up your own conscience. This sort of thing spread around the world. Now, 40 years later, what's the result of that? That there's this kind of embedded belief in Catholics and others that you can just sort of do whatever you want to do. So we all recognize that there's sin, right? 95% of the world recognizes there's sin, but if you ask for somebody to say, is that sin in me? Well, the answer is no. Oh, there's sin, but that's a sin, but not what I'm doing. I'm a nice person. That's the mentality that has crept into 20th and 21st century America and Western Europe, that you can just do whatever you want. You know the old book by the psychologist, I'm okay, you're okay? No, we're not. I know I'm not okay, and I'm willing to bet I've never met anybody else that I would say was okay either. Well, they're in heaven, but not on earth. Not on earth. We're all messed up. We're all messed up. I am not okay. I am a sinner in a fallen world whose nature is tainted by the stain of original sin. My natural state is to be fallen from grace. My supernatural state is that God lifts me out of that, as He lifts us all out of it. But don't get this wrong. We don't start up here. This is where we're supposed to finish. By our natures, we start down here. And many of us, including me, as I said earlier, stay down here for a very long time. Some people stay down here forever and finish up their eternity, or go to eternity like that, sad to say. But what the teaching in this letter from Pope Paul VI said, the name of the letter was Humanae Vitae. Don't get all freaked out. All that means is of human life. That's all it means. And Pope's letters usually are given a 1 or 2 word name, meaning the first couple of words of the name of the letter. That's all. So in Pope Paul's encyclical, Humanae Vitae, he isolated the very heart of what it is to be a faithful Christian, to be a faithful Catholic. What he isolated was the very foundation on which the human family and the societal family is based, and that is selfless love. That is what is at the heart of Christianity as far as our response to God's revelation. Selfless love. We do things out of selflessness, and that is what makes us Christ-like. When we do things out of selfishness, that's what makes us Satan-like, or away from God. It's just that simple. And Pope Paul wrote all of this down, and you can go online and read these things. You go on our website, catholictelevision.org, and click and link right to it. There's 1,000 places you can read the encyclical. And one part you'll read is the almost prophetic nature of the back half of it. He sets up what this is what we mean by love. This is artificial contraception. This is why it goes against love. And I will tell you that any society or culture that adopts a contraceptive mentality, here's what will happen to it. Wrecked marriages, divorce, premarital sex, unwanted pregnancies, abortion. This is what will happen. Why? Well, secularists would have you believe, well, that's because your birth control isn't effective enough. No, that is not why. Why those things happen is because when we get wrapped up in sex and self-pleasure and start looking at each other as nothing more than just an object, yeah, we can sit there, in the bar and say, hey, I'll get you a martini there, sweetheart. Yeah. Oh, he's so nice. Oh, he's so nice. No, he's not. He's a lech. He's a lech. Guilty as charged. He's a lech. Looking at someone as an object. That's it. That's it. And 50 years ago, this probably wouldn't have applied to women as much, but I can tell you, having hung around bars quite a long time, oh yeah, it does. Everything that women's lib took from men and gave to women was the bad stuff of men. The bad stuff of men. There are so many women who are just as lecherous as men. The whole society has debased itself, just as Pope Paul said would happen. You even become too selfish to get married. Everything is about your own pleasure. Everything is about how your own life centers on your self-indulgence. So much so now that for the first time in history in America this year, that there are now more people living together than there are who are married. If you are married, you are now officially in the United States in a minority for the first time in living history. See how fast evil spreads. 40 years ago, no one would ever have imagined this. But there are times, I don't know if you've heard this before, but you can put a frog in a boiling pot of water, set a pot to boil, throw the frog in it. That frog will jump right out instantly because it feels the heat in it. You put a frog in a cool pot of water, turn the fire on and let it slowly heat up. The frog will stay there, and just as the waters boil, it will slowly adapt to its environment. Its blood internally will begin to boil, and the frog will just flip over and die without ever having realized anything was going to go wrong. That is how Satan has crafted what has happened to Western culture. If he showed all this horror, misery, and everything right off the bat, everybody would run away from it, because that's our nature. We run away from things that we're scared of, and they're frightening and terrible. But evil, we will accept little by little by little. Little by little. And that's how we've come to where we are. And I don't think anybody could look around and I challenge anybody who has issues with this, go read that encyclical. It's called Humanae Vitae. Go read it. It's not that long. You could read it in half an hour, maybe, if it took you that long. Read that encyclical and see how prophetic it is. Now, was it prophetic because he had visions? Did Jesus come down and tell Pope Paul, hey, this is what's going to happen? No, he used his natural reason. He used his natural reason. When artificial contraception becomes the way you sexually deal with somebody else, whether you're married to them or not, that reorients how you think about things. Sex is nothing more at that point than just something for yourself. That's it. So, doesn't it stand to reason that if you let this most intimate area of your life become nothing but a bastion for your own selfishness, why wouldn't you let all these other areas become the same way? When you start looking at someone not as a human being made in the image and likeness of God, but as an object for your sexual gratification, well, why wouldn't you, if you happen to get pregnant, say, you know what, here's another human being, happens to be inside you, but let's run off to the abortion clinic real quick. Or divorce, or broken families, or fathers who abandon their children. Well, why wouldn't all of these things happen? Pope Paul wasn't a prophet. He wasn't a prophet. He just looked down the road and saw the logical conclusion of what would happen. And he was right. People become ultimately too selfish to marry. They won't even marry her. Why should they marry? Why should I say, I love you so much, and I will commit myself to you and step into this arrangement where I have to give up part of myself when I have spent my entire life living it as though I was the only person on earth? Why would I commit to you? Why should I? You know, that horrible expression that, people use all the time about, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? I mean, this is an old line that's true. And unfortunately today, that swings both ways. This is the culture that we are immersed in. We are immersed in a contraceptive mentality where the first thing is at the beginning of a relationship, even if it's a one-night stand, the first thing I think about is my own sexual gratification. Why on earth, remember the old expression your moms used to tell you, never gets better than when you're dating? Well, if that's how you start out, how do you think you're going to end up? We'll talk more about that right after we take this break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The One True Faith. We're talking today about Catholic teaching on sexual morality. Sex is the means, one of the means for salvation. Holiness is the end of that means. What? Are you kidding me? No, we're not allowed to have sex. You can't talk about sex. No, that's ridiculous. Sex is a gift from God. Sex is a gift from God, and within the confines with which God gave it to us, a married couple, willfully consenting, each to the other, open to new life, is a gift from God. And we are doing what God has commanded us to do and wants us to do. We are participating in creation. And because of that, when that happens, you are doing God's will. Somebody show me a definition of holiness that is summed up better than doing the will of God. Come up with a better definition for holiness than that. When we participate in any action that is in conformity with the will of God, we are on our way to heaven. That's how we get there, isn't it? That's what Jesus said. I come so that you do the will of my Father. That's what he said. When you're doing it, that's what you're doing. We live our sexualities, and we all have them. We each have our own individual sexuality. We live our sexuality in sort of three different areas. We live it in marriage, we live it in the single life, and we live it in the consecrated life. And let's talk about the married life for a second. Sex in the married life, church teaching says, is holy. It's not just something over there, like doing the dishes. It's holy. It is a holy and good thing. God made it that way. It's holy in its origins. It's holy in its purpose. And its purpose is to make husband and wife holy, and through their holiness to first of all, create the future generation of heaven, future citizens of heaven, and then through their holiness, help take those children there. I mean, what could be more noble than that? There aren't very many other callings on earth that are more noble than that. You get to participate with Almighty God in creation. You get to bring to this life the future citizens of heaven, and then you get to help take them there. Wow. There's not much else you'd want to do, is there? Since we are called to holiness, and we're all called to holiness, so are husbands and wives. So are married couples. They're called to holiness. Of course they are. That's why there's the sacrament of matrimony, so they can both participate and live in this sacrament and help each other get to heaven. How does sex make couples holy? There's 4 ways. 1, through joy. Joy is a holy thing. And in its proper state, sex in marriage is a joyful thing. You should be joyful for this. Almighty God has given you a gift to enjoy, and you show him gratitude for this. This is a wonderful gift that God has given. I can't believe there's a Catholic guy up there saying sex is a good thing. Marge, come here, listen to this. Turn the volume up. He's saying sex is an okay thing. I'm saying it's more than an okay thing. I'm saying it's a way for you to get to heaven. It's a way for you to get to heaven. You are doing a noble act. And the fruits of that noble act are your children and future citizens of heaven. It is more than just a thing. It's not doing the dishes. It's a beautiful, noble act that God has enshrined. It's written on the first pages of the Bible. Sex within marriage is also holy because it leads to a generosity. First, husband to wife teaches them how to be generous to each other. It's also generous because you're open to new life. Every time we act in accordance with the will of God, regardless of what the act is, we are on the way to holiness. People don't see this. You don't see that when we do anything where we follow the will of God, at least as well as we understand it, because sometimes we might not know from day to day what is the will of God, but you certainly know when you see a beggar on the street, and if you perhaps don't have any money to give him, you at least say a prayer for him, or you go buy a sandwich and you go take it to him or something. That's a holy act. That's a holy act. You're helping yourself, and hopefully this gentleman or this lady get to heaven because they see a kind and generous act, and perhaps they'll do something. Every time you do something in accordance with the will of God, you are becoming holier. Think of the opposite of that, by the way. Sex between married couples is sanctifying as charity. It's a charitable act. You're sharing your love with another person. So of course it's a charitable act. Charity is a way to holiness. In the end, there will be three things: faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love, or charity. Charity is absolutely bound up with our salvation. If you're not charitable, you know what? Run amok. Sin to your heart's content, because you'll never see inside the door of heaven. Charity is absolutely a requirement to get to heaven. It makes us holy also in restraint. It makes married couples holy in restraint. You know, no two marriages are the same, and this doesn't play out the same in any two marriages, but every married couple at times, for 1,000 different reasons, one or both will have to restrain from expressing their love in sexual intercourse. Could be a number, could be health reasons, could be emotional reasons, could be purely just separation if somebody's in the military and they're gone. You have to exercise. Just because somebody's gone and fighting the country doesn't mean that the soldier who's off, can go run around with the local women and the wife can go find, Bob the gardener next door, like you could if you were watching primetime things on ABC or CBS. Those things are not holy. Those are sinful. Those are sinful acts. But restraint, the fact that you are exercising restraint, why? Out of love for the other person and out of commitment and promise. That is doing the will of God. And in that restraint, there is holiness, because you are doing an action, or in this case, a non-action, out of the love of God. You're becoming holier. All of this sanctifies us. We're sanctified through generosity because we welcome new life into the world. That's why the Catholic Church teaches that every sexual act must be open to the possibility of the transmission of new life. Doesn't mean every time you have sex you have to have a child. Many people today no matter how many times they have sex, they can't have a child. But it has to be open to the possibility, because that mimics or is an imitation of the Trinity. The love between the two begets yet another. That's the Trinity. That's what's going on in marriage, in the marriage act. We as humans get to participate in this mirror, this reflection of God, of the Godhead. And yet people go out and buy this on the street for $20. And you go into a party store, and there it is on magazine covers for $1.25 in full view of your children who you're trying to get to heaven. Why? Sick world. Sick world. Talk about holiness being sold for pennies. Sex can make us holy as we use sex and we are engaged in sex on the way to heaven, but so can not having sex. So can not having sex get us to heaven. It's another way our sexuality is employed in our spirituality. Everything God has made is good, right? Everything God has made is good. But its goodness for us in our lives depends on how we use that. Are we using that in conformity with the will of God? In the single state, controlling the urge for sexual gratification is a means to heaven. Why? Because God wants sex used in this fashion, the way He set it up, according to the natural law, between one man and one woman, open to the transmission of life. That's how He wants it used. It is also His will, therefore, that it not be used this way. So if you are not using it this way, you are living your life in conformity with the will of God, and you too are getting to heaven. You're doing it in a different way. You're doing it with your sexuality in your circumstances in life, but you are doing the same thing. No amount of cultural lingoism or crying in your beer or romance will alter the fact that sex is for the expression of love between a couple open to the transmission of new life. That is what it is for. How do we know that? Do you need divine revelation to know that? Do you need do you need a prophet to come back from heaven and tell you that? No, because look what happens if you just let it run its natural course. You will conceive, most likely. You'll have a child. You'll have more children. That's what will happen. That's what we mean by natural. What will happen? For you to insert, notice the words. This is natural. What's the opposition to it? Artificial. Artificial. We introduce into this act an artificial means of preventing it, contracepting. We are artificially going against that which is natural. It's natural because God wants it this way. That's how it got its nature. God gave it this nature. When we do something outside of that to go around it or block it off or prevent it, we are going against nature. And when we go against nature and we live in such a way that we live not by the natural law but by our fallen natures, and we turn selfish and self-centered, everything that comes from that, we get every last thing we deserve. Disease, broken marriage, messed up children, divorce, broken homes, abortion. It's the rule of the late 20th century, isn't it? It's the rule of the late 20th century. 1 out of every 2 marriages fail. This was not the case. This was not the case. A lot of people don't realize this, but even in Protestant denominations, there wasn't a single Protestant denomination in the world that accepted artificial contraception until the Anglican Church did at a conference in the city of Lambeth in 1930. Lambeth, 1930. They call it the Lambeth Conference in 1930. That was the first time any Christian denomination accepted artificial birth control as being okay. I know Protestants, so I've told that too, who are shocked when they hear that. They're saying, are you telling me that the entire Christian world opposed artificial birth control until just 75 years ago? It's exactly what I'm telling you. Look it up. The Lambeth Conference in 1930. And the reaction to it, forget what the Catholic Church's reaction to it was. Other Protestant churches' reactions to that was like, you're out of step. Whoa, you're out of step. That is breaking with centuries of understanding of what we mean by this. Well, little by little, one by one, they all caved in to the point now where almost the Catholic Church stands almost totally alone in this teaching. And if you're waiting for this teaching to change, keep waiting, because it will not change. This is not a teaching the Catholic Church can change. Here's another misunderstanding, and it reaches not to just in sexual morality within the church, but it reaches to all facets of Catholic Church teaching, official church teaching. The Catholic Church cannot change the teaching. It's not our teaching. It's what we hold, but we didn't make it up. It's not our teaching. The teaching comes from Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. We are the messengers of that teaching. It will never change. There will never be women priests. Artificial birth control will never be sanctioned and blessed by the church. Never. Get it into your heads. Never. I think it's funny, when I was in Rome for the Pope's funeral, Pope John Paul's funeral, and of course paying attention to all the television coverage. And I hadn't seen it, as nobody had. We hadn't seen a papal election covered in the secular media for 26 years, 28 years. And it was just funny to watch this new crop of reporters all over the world. Well, that pope's gone, and so the next one's going to come, and there are a lot of people here who are hoping that he changes this rule and he changes that rule. This isn't the White House we're talking about. It's not Congress. It's the will of God. There isn't a pope in history who has ever thought that this is my teaching that I could change. Never. It will never. It is not the Catholic Church's rules. It's the rules from God that the Catholic Church says, because we are commanded to say them. With charity, but with clarity. Charity and clarity. That's how Catholic teaching should be delivered, and it has not been delivered like that for the last 40 or 45 years. That seems to be changing a little bit. I hope we're one of the folks that are helping to change that. But it's changing little by little, but there's an awful lot of damage that's been done. And you know the sad part of all of this? It's destroyed people's ability to become holier. It's destroyed people's ability to become holier. Withholding the truth, no matter how unpopular it is, not saying it, destroys people's ability to become holy, because they can't live according to the will of God, because they don't know what the will of God is, because you're not telling them what the will of God is. You have a duty. We all have a duty. We don't have to be nuns. We don't have to be priests. We don't have to be bishops. We have a duty to tell people this is the truth. And I will tell you, on this one, you will get laughed out of the room. Oh well, when Jesus mentioned himself in the real presence, he got essentially laughed out of the room. He said it outside, but they all left. What they do, you do not have to stand in front of the throne of God and account for. But if they don't hear the truth and you have the opportunity to say it to them, you do have to stand in front of the throne of God and admit that, and stand in judgment for that. The more meritorious the action that we do, the holier we become. It's that simple. That's why when somebody gives up their life for the faith, there's nothing more they can do. There's nothing more they can do. You know, as Jesus said, anyone who lays down his life, for a friend, love, no man hath no greater love than this, that he lay down his life for a friend. There is nothing more meritorious you can do than that. And because of that, the church has taught, if you are a martyr, you go directly into the beatific vision. You've given up your life. There's nothing more you can do. Well, we have to give up our lives here. We're not getting thrown to the lions, at least not right yet. We're not getting thrown to the lions today, but little by little, we are persecuted. We are persecuted, and the church's teaching on sexual morality is where you will take it on the chops every time. Friends will leave you. Trust me, friends will leave you. They will think you are crazy. They'll at least think you're an idiot. They'll think you're nuts, you're touched. They will desert you. I know. They will have nothing to do with you. The more meritorious the action, the holier you will become. That's what we're called to do. That's why Jesus says, pick up that cross. How can any of us live our lives like this? How can any of us live our lives? There are some real practical issues with the church's teaching regarding sexual morality. There are some real practical issues. I can't afford children right now. I'm in too much of an emotional state of depression right now. There's this issue right now. You know what? I can't find the right woman, but I'm a 26-year-old guy and I gotta have sex. These are real-time issues. Our natural state as human beings, our natural state is lust. It's how we're built. Nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants to hear this. But our natural state is lust. We think of ourselves. We even have an expression that we as humanity says. When somebody does something wrong and they commit a sin or they do some action that's horrible and that action was self-centered, don't we say, well, it's only natural? Yeah, it's exactly what we say, because it is. But what's natural to us is a fallen world in which we are very much the fallen objects in that world. That's what's going on. That's what this is about. Realizing that we have to rise above our fallen human nature. And let me tell you, there is one part of our nature that Satan will just come around and come back around and come back around again, and it is lust. Because every one of us has a sexuality. And however we play that out in our minds, our hearts, our physical actions, how we look at other people, what did Jesus say? Any man who even looks after another woman has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's from the mouth of God Almighty. That's not Mike Voris saying that. It's not the Catholic Church making that up. It's us repeating. Any man who even so much as looks after another woman has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That's a harsh teaching, men, isn't it? That is a harsh teaching. There is no way we are ever going to be able to live out that teaching without grace. Absolutely not. Won't happen. Will not happen. And if you are given to think that you are holy, I'd like to think I'm a saint until I wake up. If you're given to think, well, I've done okay, I'm all right here, this is okay, I'm kind of getting along, and then comes the temptation. If you think that you can overcome that temptation yourself, I've got a little bankroll back here. Look at this. I've got $63 and whatever, 28 cents worth of grace. I'll get rid of that temptation. Don't kid yourself. You will never overcome a temptation. You can't out-trick the devil. I can't out-trick the devil. Human beings in our little stupid brains can never, ever, not once, can we outsmart an angelic intelligence. It'll never happen. It'll never happen. We cannot do this on our own. That is the point of grace. Now, let me ask a question, because a lot of people have heard this before. Let me ask people sitting at home. It's a question for you too. When a temptation comes your way, can you overcome it? Will God allow a temptation to come your way that you will not be able to overcome? Sure He will. Sure He will. Because you don't do the overcoming. You don't do the overcoming. I don't do the overcoming. When you pray for grace to overcome the temptation. And every single time a temptation comes your way, you don't fight it. You cooperate with a grace that you pray for, and you have the merits of that grace overcome that temptation for you. You get in that boat of grace, and you get across that sea of temptation. We don't do anything. All we do is cooperate. But we need to know what to pray for. We need to know how to pray. We need to know what to pray for. Master, teach us how to pray. Give us this day our daily bread. That's what we pray for in everything. Give me the grace to be able to overcome the things I need to overcome because I can't do it on my own. Why is that a holy act? That prayer makes you holier. That prayer in and of itself, saying that prayer, God, give me the grace to overcome this temptation, is twice holy. One, you're praying and you're admitting that you don't have the strength to do it. That's humility. That's humility. Recognizing that you can't do this, that you're weak, that this temptation actually is able to come to you and get inside you and mess you up and knock you off kilter. The second way it is because you are now praying for that grace, and that is the prayer that will be answered. Ask and you shall receive. Knock and the door will be opened to you. God, give me the grace to overcome this temptation. Then the temptation will be overcome. Then the temptation, but not through your efforts. It will begin because you are on the road to holiness and you do not want to leave the path of holiness. Or, for perhaps many of us that are not on a daily path of holiness, ask. Ask for the grace. Admit your weakness. And ask for the grace to be able to be put onto the path of holiness. So as you start advancing in the spiritual life, little itty-bitty, teeny-weeny, almost immeasurable baby steps at first. But as you do this and as you keep advancing in holiness, you will become holier. That's the point. And all of this will be shared with you. God, what is holiness? What is holiness? It's getting close to God to the point where when you die, you're holy. That's why we call somebody a saint when they die and they're in heaven. That's just an English version of the Latin word meaning holy. You're holy. You're completely holy now. That's what we're moving to, isn't it? Isn't that what this whole thing is about? This whole thing is about being a holy person, as holy as you can possibly get in this life. The only way you're going to do that is to pray for the grace to overcome temptation. And you need to have charity. We all need to have charity. We need to have charity because you know what? When you follow the church's teaching on sexual morality and you live that chaste life, because it is making you holy, you start to become more holy. And who is holy? God. You start to participate more and more in the life of God. And what does that turn you into? It turns you into somebody who is charitable and loving. The closer you are to God, the more loving you are. Simple heavenly math. Charity equals chastity, and chastity equals charity. You're not getting into heaven, none of us are, unless we possess both of those. Charity and chastity. That's what we need to have. And one begets the other, and one helps with the other. Stay faithful in this ocean of sexual evil and perversion. And even people who participate in this, as I did for years, know in the back of your mind or deep in your heart, you know, man, there's just something not right here. And you keep going after it. You keep chasing, and you're not happy. You're not happy. If you're watching this right now at home and you're sitting there and all this is sinking in, you know you're not happy. You might be thrilled for an instant. You might have your mind distracted because of a physical pleasure for a moment. But as you know, when that physical pleasure has ended, has come to an end, you feel miserable. You feel miserable. And because you feel miserable, you go looking for it again. Talk about looking for love in all the wrong places. That's not love, folks, that's lust. And they're two entirely different worlds. Follow the church's teaching on this, as hard as it is at times, and you will become more capable of living the church's teaching on this. It's a funny thing about grace. It's a funny thing about grace. The more you acquire grace, the more grace you are able to acquire. And the more grace you are able to acquire, the holier you become. And you get in this, it's the same thing even in the sexual world, in the world of sexual sin. The more you indulge in it, the more you want it. The more you want it, the more you chase after it. The more you chase after it, the more you get. And you get in that cycle. Well, the same thing is true over here. This is hell's copycat. This is hell aping a spiritual life with a sick, evil life. With grace, the more you want it, the more you have it. The more you have it, the more you live like you have it. The more you live like you have it, the more you get. And you keep going like that. And you become holier, and you become holier. Over here, the more you chase after it, the more you get it, the more you want it, and you become evil. You become evil. Don't become evil. Become holy. That's what our lives are supposed to be about. We're going to come back with some questions from our studio audience right after this. Well, welcome back, and thank you for joining us here in the One True Faith. We've been talking about the Catholic Church's teaching on sexual morality today, and we're ready to take some questions from our studio audience. So, sir, please step up to the microphone. What's your name and where are you from?
I'm Frank from Dearborn Heights.
How you doing, Frank?
Pretty good, I guess. For believers, the consequences of sexual immorality are obvious, eternal damnation. But for non-believers, what can you say are the worst consequences of sexual sin, sexual immorality?
Boy, I guess on that score, I would just say open up a newspaper or walk into virtually any cocktail party and ask people how their lives are going. You could, where does it start? AIDS, venereal disease, broken homes, marriages, divorced families, children of divorce, which is one of the things that really gets kind of lost a lot because American culture, Western culture, hasn't connected the problem that artificial contraception is what's leading to all of this. They haven't made that jump. The reason they haven't made that jump, we as a culture haven't made that jump, is because we don't want to. We don't want to admit that when we do this, this is the result. Because we all know the results are horrible. So how do we get rid of these results? By stop doing this. And we don't want to stop doing this. That's painfully obvious. That's painfully obvious. All of the horrible things that come from a contraceptive mentality, we all agree are bad, but we want to keep on contracepting. That's what we want to do. They ought to take those mud flaps on the back of trucks, keep on trucking. You should just replace them in America and keep on contracepting, because that's all America's about when it comes to sexual morality. It's just free license, do whatever you want, do your own thing. Oh, and by the way, if you do your own thing and you get in trouble, just kill it. And that's what happens. That's what happens when you don't follow God. God gives us these laws for a reason. He doesn't give us these laws to say, rah, 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 rah. He gives us these laws so that he knows that if you follow these laws, this horrible stuff won't happen and you'll be happy. The laws are given to us for us to be happy, not for God to sit there and keep a ledger. And, it's just missed in modern culture because we're too immersed in sex. It is impossible. I would challenge anybody to flip through TV for 1 minute, and not see something sexually provocative on TV. Just click, 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 click. 1 minute. Wouldn't happen.
Okay, thank you much.
Thanks, Frank. Hi, sir. What's your name and where are you from?
Hello, my name is John. I'm from the National Shrine of Little Flower.
Hi, John.
Royal Oak. The first question I had was, what is the Church's position in vitro fertilization?
Nope, absolutely not. You are creating a new life, and a test tube is creating new life. One of the things that lots of people don't know, and it's interesting because somebody who's closely related to our program here, not on staff, but who has a lot of things here, brought this up to us, that had they known the full truth about in vitro fertilization, they would have never gone ahead with it. But the full truth is that a number of eggs from the mother and sperm from the father mixed together, and you start off with a group. This isn't one, it ends up as one, but you have to, at some point down the road here, normally speaking, you have to decide which one of these new lives that you've created you're now going to kill. They never tell you that in the clinic. Then nowhere do you hear that. You see these nice little brochures and their nice soft edges and pink roses and, oh, we're holding our new baby. Meanwhile, 5 or 6 of them you had to flush down the toilet to get this one. You never hear that truth. And that's pretty typical of Satan, isn't it?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. We'll be right back. Well, everyone, welcome back. And talking about things going back to the way they were, first century Christians, the early Christians realized that they were in a fight, a spiritual battle of just incredible proportions. They were fighting an empire ruled by pagans that was bent on destroying them, and they survived. They survived because they were humble, they were willing to sacrifice whatever they had to, and they knew that they were in a battle, and they fought that battle, and they fought that battle with charity, and they were loving, and they were kind. They were also victims. Make no mistake about that. They were also victims. Many, many, many thousands of them died. We don't even know how many of the early Christians were killed. But we know from contemporaneous accounts that there were thousands of them and probably more. We need to get back to the understanding that that is what it means to be a Christian. That is what it means to be a Catholic, to be willing to sacrifice and die for your faith if you have to. If you're not called to a bloody martyr's death, then you're called to the death of a martyr little by little, witnessing. It's what the word witness means. Witness and martyr mean the same thing. When we witness to Christ, it should be costing us. And if it's not costing us, something is wrong. Make sure, pray for the grace to remain faithful to the message of the gospel, to love God, and to be a witness everywhere. And on this issue, sexual morality, there is a wide open field. There is plenty of opportunity to be a witness for Christ. You will never stand in front of the throne of God having lived in 20th or 21st century America and turn to God and say, I never got a chance to shine for you, Jesus. Oh, yes, you do. And it's on this issue. This is the great heresy that our church faces in this time in its life. And we have to stand up and be the witnesses for it. So we see you next week. God bless. Thanks for watching.